It is the winner of the 2022 Ouroboros Orimeda contest held on Twitter by Imagineer's official Twitter. It is OBS00 Death Glare, with a kit of All Restore, Microshock, Charge Drain, Float Legs, and the leg ability of Revenger, which grants an additional 10% HP restoration bonus when restoring broken parts back to operation. Now, as mentioned, this one is actually an Orimeda contest winner, so it is very exciting to see yet another fan-made submission made into an official canon Metarot added to the roster. But with that being said, it's not just the design itself that is sparking a lot of excitement, but also with its kit. All Restore is a healing-based skill that, when used, will restore one broken part to each ally across the field. So that alone makes him very handy for helping sustain any broken parts, even if the HP that they get back is only the 10%. Microshock is a brand new skill being added to the game, which is more or less kind of just a melee variant of Microwave, which we've seen currently on other bots such as Maquette, who had it first, and Ben Tensada, who followed a little while behind him. But to simply explain what it is capable of, it has a damage plus bonus relative to the amount of charge in the gauge when firing. It also applies Defense Ignore when attacking, and then of course it also self-destructs on use, much akin to Microwave or Sacrifice in this case. Charge Drain is a melee-based skill and not necessarily considered an ailment, but more of an interruption-based skill attack, but upon attacking the target, it will steal a small amount of Metaforce charge, up to about 15% or so, and fill the user's own gauge with what was stolen. Float Legs also allow this Ouroboros type, Death Glare, to have pretty solid terrain coverage across the board, just as you'd expect of most Float Legs, and he is honestly packing some pretty solid specs across the board too with that. About 3649, pretty much on the dot for all of his parts when it comes to armor. His base power is very good too, at just shy of 1900 at base for his right arm, about 1502 for charge drain, even though it's not really designed to focus on power. His leg stats are honestly really nice too, at about 1512 for your melee resist and 1169 for the shoot. So honestly, he is going to be packing a pretty decent amount of resistance and defense damage reduction when on the field. His mobility is still also really good too, in that high tier of where you'd want legs to be in general, at 887. An evade of 984 is definitely nice. Could be worse, but definitely not the greatest on the field either. But one thing to bear in mind as well with Float Legs is because they have A rank on all terrains, the numbers that you see here for his leg stats are only the base stats. So that being said, feel free to go ahead and do some math and factor in approximate about 10% added to all of those stats before he does officially hit the field to get a more accurate idea of where he'd be sitting. As a pure set score, I honestly do have to rate him a pretty solid 8 out of 10. Primarily not for the fact that he's absurdly broken or has high power right from start, because he certainly does have a pretty fair amount of drawbacks which make using him a little more of a time consumption. But it's more on the fact that he actually covers for a lot of those weaknesses moderately well. The head of All Restore and his leg ability of Revenger actually do tie into each other very nicely, making another callback to another model who pulled a relatively similar stunt, the Harp type Marie Crown, only with First Aid with the Revenger ability instead. So definitely something we have seen before with her, but going to be relatively the same kind of performance here. That being said, Microshock, however, is going to be a very Metaforce reliant attack, meaning at base it is probably not going to deal a lot of damage at start until you can get a charge behind it. However, that's actually where charge drain comes into play. So even though he might be having to steal Metaforce charge from opponents slowly and kind of rely on actually the opponent having it for him to steal, he could actually feed into his own Microshock relatively well with enough time, or unless there's someone who decides to help him with, say, Charge Plant on the field to help him get that charge even faster. In addition to this, because Microshock and Microwave both behave in the same manner, they do not have a modifier relative to HP, meaning even if the part is brought back at 10%, he's still going to be packing that same damage modifier he had when he used the attack. So it's more or less a rinse and repeat kind of pattern without the buildup behind it from use 2 onwards. As mixed parts score, I have to rate him just a little bit higher at an 8.5 out of 10, given that even though his kit by itself is very well-rounded, very solid, well, rounded pun intended I suppose you could use, ha ha ha, but it is very well balanced, but it does take a little bit of time to actually get up to that point for him to use Microshock effectively. But if you were to mix it up with, say, using Full Charge as a head part instead of All Restore, and maybe build it around making use of the High Metaforce gauge right from start, if you could maybe pair him off with someone that uses First Aid or All Restore or Rebirth, and someone that can keep tabs on him whenever he's not attacking, that can definitely more so capitalize on making use of repeated uses of sacrifice-based skills like Microshock.